probably know of the buyout email that was sent to millions of federal employees on January 28th, 2025. That email was titled Fork in the Road. Now, this email has triggered a lot of panic and uncertainty in the minds of federal workers. Let's take a look at some of the differences that exist between the government sector and the private sector so that we can better understand if this is for the good of the institutions of the government, or is it transforming the government into some private sector structure?
Hello, welcome to All Things Immigrant and Society podcast. Let's break barriers, change the narrative, and navigate this path together. You're not alone. I'm your host, Dr. Iwu.
Welcome to All Things Immigrants and Society. I'm your host, Dr. Iwu, and today we're shifting gears slightly from immigration to a broader societal issue, one that truly affects millions of American families. Today we're talking about the federal workforce overhaul under President Donald Trump, the role of billionaire advisor Elon Musk, and what this actually means for workers, for families, and for the future of government employment in the United States. You probably know of the buyout email that was sent to millions of federal employees on January 28th, 2025. That email was titled Fork in the Road. Now, this email has triggered a lot of panic and uncertainty in the minds of federal workers. Does that sound familiar? This was the exact same subject line that Elon Musk used when he gave his hardcore ultimatum to Twitter employees in 2022. Now, while this is unclear if Musk personally wrote the email, we do know one thing. We know that he has been deputized to lead the overhaul under the Department of Government Efficiency. Now, this raises security, privacy, and even ethical concerns as his team has sought classified materials and examined Treasury payment records. At least 40,000 federal workers taken the deal as of February 6th, and according to the White House sources, this makes for about 2% of the 2.3 million civilian workforce. Now, what does this mean for the families of those who resign? What about those who choose to stay, facing uncertainty over being retained or being fired in the long run? Now, does this fit into the larger conversation about federal employment, governance, and even democracy itself? Let's break this down. On January 28, 2025, federal employees received an email that outlined a deferred resignation program. Now, those who accepted by February 6th will be able to leave their jobs with full pay and benefits until September 30th, 2025, without having to report to work, without having to show up in their office. Now, most people will agree with me that getting paid without doing any work is, let's say, the dream of most people. But guess what? A majority of people really want to see themselves being put to use. A majority of us, a majority of people really want to make a contribution. They want to show up. They want to do something. And this will have different challenges to people: physical, mental, and even financial challenges, as you'll come to see. Now, while voluntary on paper, the email hinted a deep workforce reduction. Office closures and stricter performance standards will be upheld. Now, for employees who decide to stay, they are already been warned in that same email that restructurings, realignment, and reductions in force were inevitable. The message was clear: take the deal now or risk getting fired later. At least 40,000 employees have already resigned as we speak. That's a significant number, but still a fraction of the 2.3 million civilian workforce. However, the real concern is the 13% of employees hired in the last 2 years. These employees lack full employment protection and could be easier to fire under reclassification efforts. Now, federal agencies have already been instructed to compile a list of these new hires within the last 2 years. A federal judge, as we speak, as of the 6th of February, has temporarily blocked these terminations. They're demanding more detail from the Trump administration before mass firings can proceed. But the uncertainty alone has thrown the entire federal workforce into a state of anxiety, into a state of panic. The biggest twist in this story is that Elon Musk is leading the charge. Elon Musk's appointment as the head of the Department of Government Efficiency has sparked outrage and concern over conflict of interest. His team has demanded access to classified documents and treasury payment records. This has raised serious privacy and national security concerns. Now, mind you, Elon Musk is not yet confirmed by the Senate, so he's not yet a federal employee. He's not yet a cabinet secretary. Many are now asking, did Musk write the federal buyout email since it reflects his previous email in 2022 to Twitter employees? There are no direct proofs to that. The fork in the road subject line is a major clue because it was this exact phrasing that he used in 2022 when he gave Twitter employees the ultimatum to commit to an extremely hardcore work environment or resign if Musk did actually influence the email. It raises ethical questions about whether a billionaire tech mogul is effectively taking over the United States government. Musk has long expressed disdain for bureaucracy and has advocated for a linear, more startup style of government. But is this overhaul really about efficiency? Is it a hostile corporate style takeover of public institutions? Let's talk about the human cost to this. For the 40,000 employees who took the buyout, I can tell you for sure that their families now face uncertainty when it comes to the financial future of their homes. While they will receive pay and benefits until September, what happens after September? How do they transition from government to private? How do they transition their work life? How do they transition their profession from the government sector into a private sector job? Mind you, many of these workers have spent decades in government services and they will definitely struggle in transitioning from these government services into the private sector. Now, for those who stayed, the stress still looms, and this stress is overwhelming. A National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration worker, speaking anonymously, described the mood inside the agency as one of fear and confusion. Many employees believe that they will lose their job anyway, regardless whether they accept the buyout. I can only imagine how these employees feel after giving decades of their lives working for the United States government. Federal employees are used to job security. Now they are facing mass uncertainty, and this will likely impact morale, productivity, and government services. Beyond individual families, what does this really mean for public trust in the government? Will government agencies be stable to function effectively? Now let's take a look at the government versus the private sector so that we can put some understanding to the team of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who predominantly are coming from the private sector into the government sector. Let's take a look at some of the differences that exist between the government sector and the private sector so that we can better understand if this is for the good of the institutions of the government, or is it transforming the government into some private sector structure. Now, I must say that the operations of the government and those of the private sector differ fundamentally from their missions and their accountability structures to their operational flexibility and decision-making process. The Trump administration, now in its second term, with Elon Musk as the central figure in the government restructuring, represent a stark shift towards corporate-style governance, a move that is raising alarms across federal institutions. Let's break down how the government and the private sector operations differ and how Donald Trump and Elon Musk's private sector approach is reshaping public policy and public administration. Let's look at the mission and the purpose of both the private sector and the government. The government is more focused on public good, while the private sector is focused on profit maximization. Government operations are fundamentally designed to serve the public interest. They exist to provide stability, public safety, national defense, infrastructure, and social programs and regulatory oversight. The private sector operations, on the other hand, are profit-driven. Their goal is to maximize efficiency and financial returns for owners, for shareholders, and for investors. Now, what is the impact of Trump and Elon Musk coming together to turn around the operations of the United States government? Their vision for the United States government is efficiency-driven, cost-cutting, and result-driven, an approach which is commonly used in business takeovers but not traditionally suited for government operations. Public services like social security, environmental regulations, and education cannot be run like a corporation where non-profitable units are simply eliminated. Government programs exist because they are necessary even if they don't generate revenue. Let's look at the workforce and accountability. The government is set up in a bureaucratic manner. The private sector is business hierarchy. Now, government agencies have layers of checks and balances, and this is to prevent corruption, favoritism, and unchecked authorities. Civil service protections exist to ensure continuity and fairness in the hiring, the firing, and the policy enforcement processes. The private sector, on the other hand, operates under hierarchical decision-making, where the CEO and executives hold ultimate authority with minimal oversight for shareholders. Employees can be fired at will. Policies can change rapidly based on business need. The deferred resignation email sent to federal employees mirrors Elon Musk's Twitter takeover, where he fired employees massively and required those who stayed to commit to an extremely hardcore work culture. Bureaucratic safeguards are being bypassed to allow for rapid restructuring, including pushing employees out through intimidation and dismantling long-standing workforce protection. Now, the push for at-will employment in government is a significant departure from traditional civil service norm, and this could lead to a more politicized and less stable workforce. Financial oversight. The government talks about public funds, while the private sector talks about corporate capital. Government fundings generally come from taxpayer money. This means spending is subject to strict oversight, public transparency laws, and congressional approval. Corporations operate with private funding. Profits and expenses are controlled internally, and the executive decisions don't require public justification. For the Trump and Elon Musk team, Musk is demanding access to Treasury payment records. This has raised serious privacy concerns. Unlike a private business where financial data is proprietary, the federal budget is a matter of public trust and accountability. Now, eliminating workforce protection and consolidating agencies could result in unaccountable spending and unethical cost cutting, similar to how Musk gutted Twitter workers without regard for long-term consequences. Now, let's look at policy execution between the government sector and the private sector. For the government sector, policies are executed through a democratic process. For the private sector, it's an executive authority. Government policies are created through a democratic legislative process. This requires input from Congress, agencies, legal experts, and even the courts in some cases. Private business can implement policies unilaterally at the discretion of their executives, making rapid changes without requiring consensus. Trump's fast-track overhaul of federal agencies under Elon Musk guidance bypasses the traditional democratic process, mirroring the top-down executive control seen in corporates. Federal workers are being given ultimatums to resign with minimal transparency. This undermines accountability and due process in workforce restructuring. The attempt to fire recent hires, about 13% of federal employees based on political loyalty, shows how governance is shifting towards corporate-style loyalty test rather than public service commitment. Let's talk about national security and stability. Government programs prioritize long-term national stability with policies designed to endure across administrations. Businesses operate on short-term profitability, often restructuring every few years on market conditions. Mass firing of federal workers could cripple long-standing agencies, including those dealing with national security, disaster response, and economic stability. Rapid restructuring could lead to a weakened, inexperienced federal workforce, unable to respond effectively to crises. Federal employees are expected to serve the country beyond political cycles, but Trump's restructuring could turn agencies into extensions of political ideologies rather than independent institutions. And what's the bottom line to all this? We're looking at a corporate takeover of the government. The Trump-Musk approach to government is not just about efficiency. It's about power and control. While business strategies can improve some aspects of government operations, they cannot replace the core values of public service, transparency, and the stability that defines democratic governance. This shift raises critical concerns. Who benefits from this restructuring? What happens when government workers are treated like disposable employees? How will national security, public service, and policy execution be affected? Is this a transformation towards a more efficient government, or is it a dangerous erosion of democracy? So where do we go from here? This isn't just about federal workers. This is about the future of governance. This is about democracy. This is about fair labor practices in the United States. Now, here is what you can do. You need to stay informed. The media is covering this issue, but it's up to us to read beyond the headlines and to be able to understand the long-term implications. Support federal workers. These are public servants who keep the country running. If you know someone affected by the buyout, offer them support. Call for oversight. Congress and the courts must scrutinize these changes to prevent abuse of power. Demand transparency from lawmakers. Vote, because policies like these are a direct consequence of elections. The people we put in offices shape the future of our country. They shape the future of the government. They shape the future of our lives. This is a defining moment for the United States. Will we allow our government to be hollowed out and corporatized, or will we fight for a strong, independent, and diverse federal workforce? Thank you for joining me today on All Things Immigrants and Society. If this episode resonated with you, share it, leave a review, and continue the conversation. Until next time, this is Dr. Ewu, reminding you that democracy isn't just about policies. It's about people. It's about you and I. So stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful, because the United States is built on resilience.